Please can join. All right, we're going to give everybody a minute to rock and roll in on here since it's just 7 o'clock properly, and I know people have to click that Zoom button. So hello to everybody who is coming in. For those of you who can hear me, hi, I am Nicole. I am the manager of Oblong Books in Rhinebeck, New York, the wonderful bookstore that is hosting this event. Before we get started on today's event, I've got a few normal housekeeping reminders for you. The first is that if I can remember how to do it, am going to enable the chat for all of you. Give me one moment. Attendees can chat with everyone. There you go. Chat is open. That'll be a sidebar on your right-hand side. Feel free to use that and chit-chat as we chit-chat. Additionally, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you will see a little Q&A button. After I asked Lisa and Emma all of these wonderful questions, you will all have a chance to ask some of questions of your own, and you can drop those in that Q&A button at any time during the event. So if you hear something and you want to follow up on it or come up with a question of your own, use that Q&A button. I was going to say last but not least, but I have two more things. If you like today's event and you like books like this one, or maybe this one, you can buy them. You can buy them from my bookstore, this bookstore. Go to oblongbooks.com, search up these books, and get yourself copies. If you've already got one, buy another one. They make great gifts. And if you like events like these, we have a little events calendar on our website as well. And we have a whole bunch of really cool events coming up. September's a little quieter because October is a behemoth of an events month for us. We have some really cool horror stuff coming up, some other really cool genre stuff coming up. So head on over there, check out the calendar, subscribe if you're not already. For those of you, again, who came in after I started my intro, hello, I'm Nicole from Oblong Books, and I'm so excited to have two, I'm going to say powerhouse sci-fi fantasy authors here today. I think they're powerhouses because their books collectively broke my brain, and I think that takes a lot of power. The first is Emma. Emma, I didn't ask how to pronounce the middle part.
Mieko.
I was right. I should have just committed to it. Emma Mieko Candon for the Archive Undying. And on the bottom of my screen, though I don't know if they're on the bottom of yours, is S.L. Huang for the Water Outlaws. These are two incredible books. The Archive Undying is about basically a living relic of a dead godlike AI who discovers that his AI might have been resurrected after he sort of falls for a too curious archivist. I've been pitching this one as perfect for the girlies who liked Harrow the Ninth, but wished it was mashed up with Pacific Rim. That's this book. The Water Outlaws is about an expert arms instructor who gets exiled from society after rejecting the advance of a government official, and joins a group of very cool bandits and tries to kind of whip them into shape as on the back end, the government is like maybe making a magical super weapon. If you love books by Shelley Parker Chan, you will love this one. Or if you love wuxia martial arts stories, this is going to be your jam. Emma, Lisa, I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
Super stoked to be here.
All right. I'm going to start with some softball questions, and then we're going to work our way up to some big questions, and then we'll come back down again. Sound good? So we're gonna start soft. I love your two main characters, and I was wondering if you could. Well, Lisa, you kind of have a bunch, but I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about Lin Chung and Sunai, respectively. I've given a little bit of the plot, but can you give us a little bit of the characters? And whoever wants to go first.
Sure. So the protagonist, and as Nicole mentioned, there are quite a lot of characters in this book. It's a sort of an ensemble cast, but if you had to choose a protagonist, it's going to be Lin Chung, my arms instructor. I did a few things with her that I really like. First of all, she's like a woman in her 40s, which is kind of unusual as an epic fantasy protagonist. That's why I like to write it. Has had some time for life experience, etc. And she's also a teacher, which I think is really unusual. I actually tried to do I wanted to do like a publicity piece, one of those like tour 5 books that blah, 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 right? And I was like, oh, it would be interesting to do like a 5 SFF books that have a teacher as their main protagonist. And I was like, where like being a teacher really matters to like the character of the plot. I couldn't think of any, and I go online. I'm like, hey, can anybody else think of any so I can brainstorm this piece? Like, people kept brainstorming. There were only like 2 ideas, and neither of them had I read. So I was like, guess not. And, their teachers are all over as side characters, and the wise old mentor who dies. We hardly ever get them as protagonists, and especially when it's something that's very important to the character. And I think pedagogy is incredibly important and underrated, and can be like kind of like a sexy, powerful, cool skill. So I'm kind of excited about that aspect of my character, and I don't think it's something that people talk about very much, because the lion's share of the impression you're going to get is exactly what Nicole said: the wuxia and the martial arts and the cinematic, Hong Kong movie like nature of the book. But so that's one thing I like to point out to people.
I like the idea that I think from now on we should just describe all teacher main characters as sexy and powerful, and maybe all teachers.
Yeah.
If you're a teacher, you're sexy and powerful.
Yeah. Oh God. No, I was so curious. I spent a lot of time over the last couple days, like finally sitting down and reading up about the water margin on Wikipedia, and I was like, I need to know why Ling Chong was the choice, like for protagonist. Like what made Lisa go like this one? This is the locus around which I'm building everything. So yeah, no, I love it. I'm gonna
just
try.
Can I just tell the audience that what Emma was saying, the book is a reimagining of Water Margin, which is a Chinese classic novel, and it has like 108 characters and 1,000 pages and like all that stuff. So that's what she's referring to. Sorry, go ahead.
Right.
Thank you for having a shorter book than that.
Okay, I'm gonna try and describe Sunai in the way that I have described him in response to Tumblr asks recently. Someone tried last night. Someone was like, can you tell me what the cast of Archive Undying is in terms of animals? And I was like, oh, actually, I have had this debate with my wife before, where we did like the Golden Compass demon things. And Sunai is a mongoose. He looks technically unthreatening, but is actually extremely good at doing one specific kind of violence. He's also actually in his 40s, but he doesn't look like it. He looks 20 because he's kind of been trapped there for the last almost 20 years. He feels 40 emotionally because he's been on the run this whole time, and is almost actively trying to destroy himself in hedonism, among other things, but also ongoing. His job is essentially to be a scout, leading people through the wilds, which are these vast spaces unpopulated between city-states, through which wild, feral, giant robots are roaming. Other ways I've described him, like he's carries himself like the jungle juice of people. When you like pour all the liquor into a bathtub and mix it up. He's a reverse magpie. He's constantly feeding people, just like pulling a candy out of his pocket and going like, you need this so you don't talk anymore. So like this is the character that I kind of wanted to bring a little bit of feral goblin energy into this main character, and I think it worked out pretty well, except it's also someone who is feeding you. It's a bit of
you have a moment very early on in the book where a bunch of characters are in the middle of an argument, and in order to stop the argument, he literally just puts his hand over somebody's mouth and just force feeds them a hard candy and is like, suck on that until you don't want to argue anymore, and just like sets off. And it was so funny. It's so good.
I wrote that thinking like, this is dangerous. They could choke.
They could, but you know what? If they kept arguing, result would have been worse.
That's true.
I love that. Now I want all of the Water Outlaw characters as animals, but I think that would take too much time. That's too many characters. We would be here all day.
They all have nicknames. So.
It is true. They do all have code names already. Only some of them are animals, though. But speaking of the nicknames and code names, I want to get into like the meat of your mutual world buildings. Because Lisa, I'm like obsessed with yours. I slipped into it so easily. Emma's, your fully broke my brain. Like in a good way, in a delightful, weird way. I'm the third person on our staff to read Archive Undying, and we've all been like, okay, we need to discuss all of this now. So I'm going to start with part of the world building that I love and that I'm obsessed with in books, which is I love where when gods are places they shouldn't be. And I love when there are no gods where there should be gods, right? And both of your books kind of take ideas of religion and godhood and power and put them kind of into things where they shouldn't be and take them away from the places that you would normally expect to see them, or twist them into something new. Can you talk a little bit about your worlds and a little bit specifically, just to indulge me, about kind of the mentality of messing about with those semi-religious elements and your magic and your science, and how that all played into your stories? And whoever wants to go first.
Yeah. So the way religion, it turns out, has been kind of a cornerstone of the Archive Undying. It's like just an element, spirituality, but of like multiple characters or their problems with that. And also like spirituality and the practice of religion. And this partially stems from the fact that I often get kind of annoyed with speculative narratives where they do things like have gods and then like it turns out that what people believe isn't like real, or that like because it's proved to be something else, or like they're being manipulated or whatever, or like if someone like on the other side, like someone is shown like, oh no, it is real, it's all real. Like it's frustrating to me. It has like conspiracy theory vibes that I find icky. And so what I wanted to do was have a religion, or like religions functionally, but like there's a dominant one because of the particular world history that has its own theory of like what the nature of the divine is, that is, one, it predates all of these mega powerful entities that are referred to as AIs, and two, those mega powerful entities have their own relationships with that faith and with that history and with that practice. And so I just wanted to like draw out something that felt realistically believable and powerful, and like people were interacting with it like the way they interact with actual faith, where like some people don't because it just doesn't resonate with them, and some people get like very existentially absorbed in it. And some of those entities just happen to be like so functionally powerful that they are indistinguishable from what you might describe as a god, and people do like casually refer to them as such. And it just sort of like became a cornerstone of everything, in part because I was also in the fabric and the foundation of this world sometimes killing those godlike entities, which is like a apocalyptic maneuver. And apocalypse is something very theorized about and considered in the context of religion. So, and is something I'm so specifically interested in it, and have been this whole time, that I know the word for the study of apocalypse, which is eschatology. So
hold on, I have to write that down.
Like,
I learned a new word today.
It all sort of flowed out of that initial sense of like, well, I don't want a world in which the question of is God real is something that you can deal with any better than you can deal with in our world, where it's like, to some people, yes, God is real and therefore God is real, and to some people God isn't real and therefore God isn't real. It's like it just felt more honest to do it like that.
What do you mean that killing a god causes an apocalypse? That's like
yeah, I mean,
that's
right?
amazing. That is awesome. I guess it's my turn.
Yeah.
Emma, I love everything you said so much. I'm just like sitting here nodding along. I feel like there's a little bit of maybe proneness in especially in American SFF, which tends to overlap a lot with like scientists and skeptics and stuff, of which I will freely say that I'm one, to, you know, be a little bit scornful of religion, right? And to, you know, have a little bit of a scoffing kind of feeling towards it. And, you know, I've been a party to a number of conversations, which I think I might be misremembering, but I think some of those Emma's been in as well. So feel free to jump in if you like. But the in some of my communities that are more international and communities of color, where we talk about things like religion and, you know, things that may be regarded as superstition, etc., but that are very like culturally enfolded and stuff like that. And the mindset feels like very, very different to me in like those conversations, and just in how various cultures interact with the ideas of religion and the ideas of higher powers, and that they don't have to look like how Americans generally think of religion. Not all Americans, obviously, because we have many, many cultures in America, but certainly the sort of idea of, you know, Abrahamic religions, or the kinds of religions that usually enter politics in the United States, which tend to be like versions of Christianity and stuff like that, which is, I think, what a lot of people tend to be familiar with here. And you know, I'm Chinese, and I also have Japanese family and have lived in Japan. And I really and I mean this in a hopefully a very respectful way, and not in a like looking necessarily in a with an outsider kind of fascination way, but the ways in which, especially like my own ancestral cultures, intersect with religion and with gods, are very different from, you know, just sort of what I grew up seeing. And one of those that I think is very, very cool is the way, like in a lot of Chinese mythology, a lot of Chinese god personas were actually real people. So one of the very famous ideas of this is this god of, there's a god of war, Guan Yu, who was a character in Romance of the Three Kingdoms, fictional character in the novel, but also a real character in real history. Very, very like a famous warrior character, and basically like became a god of war, you know. And there's a sort of like thinking about that I will say that I don't fully necessarily understand. You know, it's not my religion, and it's not the way. But you know, I'm very interested in just like learning about how people think about things, and thinking about how people think of things, and how this can be like a cultural thing as well. And also, you know, when I talk to my friends in Japan, they talk about, for example, Shintoism in Japan being depending on which of my Japanese friends I talk to, it might be a religion or it might not. One of my friends, when I was talking to her, you know, I was just sort of like, you know, asking questions, and she was very, we were doing a lot of like cultural exchange with each other. And she kind of like had to stop and think, and then like pull out her phone and Google, and she's like, you know, she's Googling in Japanese, and she's like, is it a religion? Is it? We're talking in Japanese as we're doing that. And she looks up like and she finally finds like the council, the highest council in Shintoism or something, and they're debating it, you know, like they haven't decided what to call it. So and another one of my Japanese friends talks about it as just being like God in everything, and doesn't even think about it with a name attached to it, you know. So these ideas of kind of religion as culture, I guess, are very interesting to me as like ways of interacting with the world, and ways of interacting with the world as like a powered thing. You know, we talk about power a lot in SFF, and the power of gods, and the like supernatural powers. And, you know, there's a lot in Chinese, you know, culture and mythology that has to do with, you know, life forces. Supposedly in Star Wars, the Force was based on Qi and the whole like life energy thing out of Chinese culture and stuff, which of course is very big in, you know, wuxia and you know, Chinese martial arts fiction. So I don't know, just drawing in all of this idea of ubiquity and pulling it, and none of the religions in my book they're specifically not, you know, real religions, because I you know, I want to be respectful to real religions that people practice, but they are very, very specifically supposed to be like feeling those ideas that are a little bit more out of various like Eastern religious ideas.
Amazing.
I knew I was like, I already knew I was gonna like the Water Outlaws, just because like everything I had heard about it, I was like, this is gonna like please me a lot. But one of the very first conversations on the page is Lin Chong asking her students, who among you considers yourself a philosopher? And I was like, yes, nailed it. This is exactly the approach. I read a lot of Chinese history and philosophy in undergrad because I got like for a time just completely obsessed with it.
Oh, yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And so just like that's one of the things that has stuck with me. Just like I think it was really important for me because I was just at the time wrestling with a lot of my own beliefs about metaphysics and the point of it all, and going like, is there some point at which this is all just one big circle jerk? Like, and Chinese poetry was doing a lot for me at that time because it was like soothing my brain.
That's awesome.
But like, one of the huge takeaways from that is like, it's the way religion and faith and the practice of things is considered. It's just, it exists in such different ways in different places. So like being culturally Christian, as we often are when we grow up in the States, it shapes a lot of your assumptions that you have to work to like dash to pieces so that you can reconstruct them in a more flexible way. And so I was so thrilled to see that like right at the beginning of this book.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm so glad that came across to you as somebody who has studied that and been interested in it. And that's wow, awesome. Thank you.
I have like 9,000 avenues I want to go down. I'm going to loosely stick to my like planned script, but boy, have I written a lot of things down. So, in addition to questions about kind of religion and gods and power, these stories are also both kind of driven by found family and a devotion to a higher cause, even if that cause is not necessarily religious. So how do you kind of balance that found family, those devotions, when you're looking at planning a book as a writer? And also like, how well do you think your characters handle that? Because sometimes, especially for some of your side characters, Lisa, they do it badly. But I love them anyway.
I want to hear about this. I went first last time, so you have to go now.
Yeah, a lot of anti-heroes in my book. I love that. I love exploring like different approaches to morality. It's just like it's so good to like get to write through like stuff that, you know, maybe I wouldn't do in real life, but just to explore. Found family is one of my catnip tropes, I would say. I'm not ashamed to admit it if I'm like reading fan fiction or something. You know, found families right up there with hurt comfort for me. So you read one of my books, you're just likely to get it. I just love writing it. And part of the reason Water Margin appeals to me and by the way, if you hear Chinese classic novel and you think of something like really dry and boring, like the source material I reimagined for this book, completely not. The original Water Margin, it's vulgar. It's one of the first novels in the vernacular. It's fun. It's action-packed, epic. Lots of battles and sword fights and stuff. It's amazing. It's like 1,000 pages of like cursing and sword fights, basically. But lots of men. So, you know, we had to do something about that.
It's the Fast and the Furious of its time.
Yes, it absolutely was. That's a great description. I am going to...
I was thinking earlier, like the way I have often tried to explain the way that, because Japan will also do that thing where like a figure is real but also mythologized. I'm like, what if we as a culture treated Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter much more seriously?
Right? That would be really interesting,
right?
Anyway, and like the way we mythologize real people in general, like in the world, I think is like something that could take up a whole panel, right? And like the way different cultures do it and the different ways of doing it. I mean, speaking of Abraham Lincoln, the whole like Hamilton phenomenon and like how culturally, we could talk forever on this, but I'll actually answer your question.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. I love talking to you. The found family is just like something I really like to write. So I went into this certainly knowing I would want to do that, and knowing that that was one of the things that drew me to the original, was this idea of, you know, these bandits who really bond and will you know, die for each other and kill for each other, sometimes in ways that we wouldn't necessarily agree with even, and like, you know, where that idea of loyalty comes in when the person that you're loyal to is maybe doing things that are immoral or violent in your view. How you deal with that is like an area I like to sort of dig my nails into a little bit as well. And just that that idea of finding one's people. A lot of times when we talk about in discussions of historical fantasy, I think people who talk about there being a lot of men in historical fantasy or a lot of straight people in historical fantasy, the kind of party line of people who defend that is like, oh, well, you know, there just like weren't many out queer people or whatever, or like, you know, many women doing such and such. Well, like, first of all, we're already writing books about people who are doing something, you know, that's somehow unusual in their time, no matter who we're writing about, usually. I mean, certainly there are books that are exceptions, but a lot of times. But also, like, you know, speaking as a queer person, for example, you know, we always find each other. This is in all historical periods, right? It's very, I would argue that, like, both given my own experience and given what I know of history, it is much more unbelievable to have a book with, you know, the token queer person who's maybe out and then everybody else is cishet, whereas in my experience, one queer person alone, that just kind of doesn't happen, right? People, we always find each other. So the idea of my bandits as being a self-selecting group where they find each other because they're women, because they're queer, because they're looking for that, and then they're recruiting for that. I was really attracted to writing that in a historical fashion because, you know, a little bit of spite there, but also it really does feel real and true to me.
Yeah, no, you spot one queer, you've actually spotted 10. They're just all hiding under the cover somewhere.
Like traveling in packs.
Yeah.
Well, the joke is always if you have one queer friend and you think you only have one queer friend, you have more than one queer friend. They just don't know it yet.
Yeah. That was me and my friends in high school. Like, there was a point at which we had all come back from college and we're standing in a parking lot after a dinner and looking around going, all right, which ones of us are still cishet? Shoot.
Oh, none of us. Got it.
We had at the time one friend who took longer to come out, but like other than that, there's one person who, as far as I know, is cishet, but it's our token now.
You always need one token cishet.
We adore her. But yeah, so there's this underlying current that I think all right. When I was first trying to figure out the Archive Undying, and I had some ideas about it. It was like, okay, it's gonna be with like giant robots. Like, it's fun that you mentioned Pacific Rim, because that was definitely a huge foundational part of like how it came into my brain. But there was a point where like some very close friends of mine had come to Hawaii for the very first time when I had just started working on this book, and we took them on a whale watching tour, during which we saw no whales. But I did spend a lot of the time just sort of like staring at the mountains, because we had only just moved back like about 6 months before, and I realized, oh, this is where I want the book to live. This is where I'm going to root it. So I spent a lot of time trying to capture Hawaii as I grew up in it, not just visually and as a setting that's like tangible, but in terms of the people and the base culture that has come to be, where there's just this underlying assumption of responsibility toward each other, I think, that is one of the reasons. I think I was saying to you guys before we started, I often describe Hawaii as a small town in the shape of an island, because of the way that there is that just base underlying sense of, oh, you rely on the people around you, and so there's behavior that comes with that, which is like, even if you screw up massively, someone's going to make sure that you're fed. And obviously it's not a hug box, but it's just like the culture here is tangibly different from the cultures I've lived in elsewhere in the States, and like, I can't say as much to when I was living abroad, because I was a foreigner in those contexts. I was there for a specific amount of time. I wasn't there with family. But here, I just really was trying to evoke this idea of like the way people come together. And it was also especially important coming back to apocalypse, because one of the things that I really hate about post-apocalyptic fiction is when people go all Mad Max, because it's like, that's not how people do. I was coming to all this also from having just done a master's in psychology, and it's very annoying to me, therefore, when people are written as like fundamentally antisocial, because it's like we as a species would be extinct if that were how we worked. We're a very pro-social species, even when we're kind of assholes. So I wanted, in this world where there have been miniature apocalypses occurring at a pretty steady pace for a couple hundred years, the communities that have evolved out of that are very interested in pulling everybody in so that everybody can like keep the community alive. And so there's a lot of like these basic sense and practice of like, they know what mental health leave is. It's just a practical thing. Like when someone is a little like screwy in the brain because they've been through a lot, you need to not be relying on them to do their scary job. They need to like be doing something else for a bit. Like you need to feed people, you need to house them. So yeah, that was an underlying strain that I really wanted to reach for a variety of reasons.
The phrase mini apocalypse is inherently funny. And definitely not relevant at all to our day-to-day life. So I do have a further question about mini apocalypses, but I'm gonna go off tangent for a second, or off my script. Not that you either of you know what that is. So one of the things I really like about both of your world buildings, and Emma, obviously your book is post-current mini apocalyptic sci-fi. But Lisa, your book, even though it is historical fantasy, also has like characters doing science. Like they are performing experiments and documenting what happens and going through a religious, not a religious,
a little column A, a little column B. As we talked about, like religions and like all the places in this one.
Yes. Regimented, maybe a very structured scientific procedure. Whereas Emma, in your book, there's science everywhere and technology everywhere, but it's also like it's everywhere. We don't kind of know how it works. So what pulled you both to the way that you used science and technology in the way that you use them to kind of, again, flesh out these worlds where there's gods but not gods and found families and devotion and all these other things, but also there's like science?
I have described Archive as like fantasy dressed up as science fiction.
I love a science fantasy, baby.
And like I was describing a science fantasy at some point, and they didn't do that in the marketing, and I was like, I guess there's fear. No one is actually casting spells. But I very pointedly just like refused to explain how any of this works, because one, all the wild stuff we see did originate with humans, but those humans are dead. We have not, like, we don't know how they did what they did. There are some people who study this, or like study the weirdness, these AIs, but inherent to that study now is psychology, essentially, because you have to understand that they are people and they think. So knowing how they do what they do is also understanding why they do what they do. And yeah, like the most scientific thing in terms of hard science about Archive is the psychology, because I have tried to stay pretty true to my training and my understanding of like how neurology works. Like I was describing something that happens in the sequel I'm working on to a friend of mine. They're like, oh, so it's like a TBI. And I was like, it's a magic TBI. That is exactly what it is. So yeah, and I did that in part because if I let myself get a little too deep into the weeds, I will get lost there. And so I had to not explain things for my own sake, so I didn't get too neurotic about it. And therefore the approach was very like, whatever, it's the point is the aesthetic of it, and the point is that it's people fundamentally.
That's really cool. I mean, I don't know how an iPhone works, right? I mean, any given Apple engineer doesn't know how an iPhone
Yeah.
works, right? They only know their small percentage of the code base or whatever, not, you know. Uh, anyway, yeah, that's I love that perspective. For the Water Outlaws, there's as I mentioned, it's this reimagining of a Chinese classic. But there's also a secondary plot that is not based in that. And that secondary plot is sort of my love letter to the Song Dynasty a little bit. It's a secondary world book, but it's very explicitly based on Song Dynasty China, which is where Water Margin did take place, the novel. The Song Dynasty is this amazing period of Chinese history where, so I know historians are getting away from the word Dark Ages because it's like very one-dimensionalizing, doesn't actually describe, what's happening in Europe at the time. But, this is when things were like kind of slow enough in Europe that people called it the Dark Ages. And over in China, there was this like explosion of innovation and technology. The four great inventions are from the Song Dynasty, which is paper, the compass, the printing press, and gunpowder. I mean, these were huge. Paper money also, like different economic ideas. People were, philosophizing, as we're talking about, and really pushing forward, and progress was huge, in the way they were thinking about progress at the time, of course. And they were doing science. They were doing a ton of science. They were doing a ton of invention. And I wanted to put that in as a scientist and as somebody who's really excited about the time period I was writing about. So the secondary plot line is basically my Song Dynasty plot line, and it is where they are sciencing the magic, because it's also having to do with this idea that we were talking about before of magic and supernatural and godlike powers being part of this fabric of life where they're not differentiated. There aren't magicians and not magicians in the same way that fantasy usually does it, I think I would say, where like you have magical powers or you don't kind of thing. There's no real, like, people realize what magical powers are, but not that they're different from science that they don't understand, right? Which I think is so realistic, because if we had magic, especially if we were, in a pre-modern society, where maybe, there's a lot we hadn't worked out about the way the world works yet and how natural laws work, how would we differentiate something like gravity from something like the kind of supernatural powers that allow you to leap higher than you otherwise would while doing martial arts, right? Like they're both parts of the natural world that I don't know how they work, right? You're one of these more ancient people looking up in the sky. You don't know how the sun stays in the sky. Why is that different, right? So I kind of love that concept. So yeah, my characters are they're trying to science the magic, and I love that.
Science is just magic we have words for. That's all it is. And sometimes they give us words and I go, that's still magic. I have friends who are scientists and they still can't explain to me in a way that is satisfying to me how dark matter isn't just magic. So
I feel that way about most physics. I failed out of it in high school and have not gotten any better since. So
I mean, I think most like quantum physicists would freely admit that it's pretty much just magic.
I've come to understand that like we share something based on the fact that I have zero knowledge and they have as much as they can, but there is still a difference.
And medicine is just alchemy. I mean, okay. So
I mean, we understand so little about medicine. It's really scary. When I talk to my friends who are medical researchers, we know nothing. Oh my gosh, this is terrifying.
No. I mean, like that's I said I wasn't gonna get on the AI stuff, but like that's what infuriates me about AI talk, because when we talk about intelligence, I'm like, we don't know how human intelligence works. You sit down.
Hey Emma, have you read like anything good about AI?
Okay, yeah. I said I wasn't going to talk about AI stuff because people have been asking my opinion from day one, because I happened to publish a book with AI stuff in it right in the middle of us discoursing about it. And what I tell them is I wrote my AIs as a fundamental argument with the concept of calling these very fancy algorithms AIs, because I wanted them to be based on actual human-like intelligence, and so that is what they are. But if you want to read something that is very closely rooted in our actual technology and the actual like moral problems and things we should be discussing, you should read a short story by S.L. Huang called Murder by Pixel, because it deals with those in a very interesting and very haunting way. So, hey, guess what? They don't just write books, they write really good short fiction.
Thank you, Emma. Emma told me before the thing that this was an answer that she was giving in interviews and such, and thank you.
Oh, I forgot I told you that. Yeah, no,
That's why I'm like, the little blush emoji. Thank you.
I wish there was a way that I could do reactions during this. That way we could just set up the little blush emoji. Okay. All right. My meatiest question for you as we get to the last 20 minutes of our time. So we mentioned like the idea of like religion as like conspiracy theory vibes a little bit earlier. We've been talking about like the role of science. I recently fell down a rabbit hole where I've been listening to the Behind the Bastards podcast a lot. If you're not familiar with Behind the Bastards, it is a podcast that basically looks at all of the terrible people in history and like looks at their lives and how and why they did what they did. I fell down that rabbit hole because he did a 6-part series on Vince McMahon, who runs WWE, and that is pro wrestling is like my love and my hatred. But recently I listened to the episodes on like MK Ultra, as of course I was reading both of your books, where there's a literal level of government conspiracy happening kind of in both of them. Definitely yours, Lisa. Emma, less direct government and more like the ripple effects of everything happening in the world. And what I wanted to talk about was when we look at what inspires our fiction, right? Especially when you are somebody writing from a marginalized identity, there is sometimes pressure put on to create worlds and characters that are just kind of like nice, and everybody does nice things, and the bad things are the obvious bad things, and then we defeat them. And there are certainly places for those books, but I love messy characters who make mistakes, and I love worlds that are not just perfect ideal utopias of what we could have, but are messy representations and responses to the world that is currently unfolding around us. In my opinion, science fiction and fantasy's role has always been to messily and imperfectly respond to the world that is unfolding around us. Where do you see that role of sci-fi fantasy? Where do you see your places in it? What kind of are the things that inspire you to respond to? And what do you hope that by having characters who are, as we discussed, older, don't necessarily make always the best decisions, who are working within their own imperfect universes, what kind of things do you hope they carry out to the readers who are approaching them? That was a good question.
Yeah, I love what you said. I love everything about it. This is a big area of interest for me too. And I think especially as you're saying, Nicole, when we come from demographics where we're expected, there's some sort of party line, I think, that gets a little bit flattened in the mainstream, where everybody from certain demographics, especially underrepresented minorities in various societies, we're expected all to have the same opinions on the same issues, and to, in areas of representation, I feel like this happens two ways. One is that, for example, white writers might be really nervous about writing characters of color or characters from other cultures because they want to be respectful and get it right, which I applaud that, that motivation. But then that sometimes results in kind of like milquetoast characters as in the broader public of book after book coming out, where people are kind of afraid, I think, to give their characters sharp edges and teeth, and also make them a minority, Yeah. And that's it's frustrating. I want the really good villains. I want the complicated characters, and I want them to look like me too, not just the absolutely perfect heroes. And then of course we also get the other side where there's maybe only one of us, and the defining characteristic of this character is that she's the woman on the team, right? So it was really important to me writing the Water Outlaws to make this a society where people are so diverse in their mindsets and their opinions. And I mean, they're all broadly similar demographically in the ways that we bucket people in modern America, but they respond to that very differently. And they respond to oppression and the tyrannical government, et cetera, very differently. And I don't think readers will agree with the way all of them respond, but I was really aiming to make that understandable, to make it so that each one of these characters is some in vehement disagreement with each other, but that we can understand where they're coming from, all of them. And as they evolve and arc, and I have some characters who are arcing in opposite directions, and some characters who are, you know, trying to burn down the patriarchy, and some characters who just like to burn things down, you know, and if the patriarchy is convenient, then cool, but otherwise, you know, maybe innocent people too. Yeah, so there's a lot of moral complexity and various shades of gray among the characters. And that was very important to me, not just because I like to read it and enjoy it in fiction, but that was important to me in the sense of having this cast demographically all able to gloriously be these different moral shades, and some even blue and orange moral shades, you know, off the black and white, who are, you know, none of which we would identify as sort of, you know, the way fantasy heroes that I grew up looked, namely, you know, white and male, etc. And really get some of this complexity, delicious complexity into it.
Man, okay, yeah, here's the thing that I keep thinking as I like I'm actually like I looked ahead to see where the water margin ended, because like I sometimes have to do that if I feel too tense. But sorry. But as I was reading it, like,
to apologize.
To be fair, the book is very old. It's you can go spoilers on that at this point. Like, I think you're safe.
When you're a writer, often what you're reading for is less the spoiler than the execution. So, but like a thought I've had again and again and again is, my God, I wish I'd had this when I was 16, because, you know, you might relate to this, that sense of like all the characters you're drawn to at that age who are like really exciting for you, they tend to be dudes, and at some point that gets to be kind of frustrating. And it meant that I could not read fiction about men for like a straight 10 years. And like
there's so many dudes in fiction who are so interesting.
Yeah,
right?
And like now I can, thankfully I can write about them too, but like, oh, the things I think this book would have done for me, and that I think it can do for other kids who are that age now, coming into this opportunity to read about these deeply complex women of every iteration all clashing against each other. Because I get so excited also when there's an argument on page where there's at least 2, optimally 3 or more points of view, and you keep on thinking, oh, they have a really good point, oh, they have a really good point, uh-oh, they have a really good point too. And it's just, you know, how does that come together? Because like that's when I feel convinced by like this writing and this story feeling real. Like, oh, okay, these aren't straw men, these are like people with principles and beliefs and histories driving them toward that. So yeah, I love that.
Thank you so much. That's seriously one of the, just, you know, I was so strongly going for that's, you know, one of the best things that I could hear somebody say on my back. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so I think I've learned about myself is that when people ask me for book recommendations, I now have to caveat, like, I don't read fluff. I'm not gonna like give you any recommendation. Like, if I happen to read something that is like gentler, I will file it away as like, hey, you can recommend this to anybody. Because I would like go like, hey, you should read this book, and the person would come back to me and be like, I'm a little traumatized. And like, are you? I guess just the way I deal with being alive and of marginalized experience in a world that has a lot of difficulties in it is by directly engaging with that. That's just my instinct. That's just how I live. It's how I feel better. Like, which isn't to say I can't engage with the sweeter things, but in my heart, what I really want most of the time, most reliably, is something that is going to damage my heart. So it's what I write too. I don't know that I can write something thoroughly gentle. Like I've had the luck now to write Star Wars a couple times, which is why I'm wearing my Star Wars shirts again today, because the short story came out, and it's probably the gentlest thing I've ever written, and it's about grief. So, you know, like there's jokes in it, but it's about survivor's guilt. So that's just how I prefer to do things. And I think there's a lot of value in figuring out what your artistic sensibility is. And certainly I have read things that are so sweet and so kind that they have made me sob openly. But that's not just my instinct. It's not really my lane. So it's how I'm going to like be over here writing consistently non-binary characters who are deeply problematic, because that's what makes me happy.
No, and also to circle back around, I think, Lisa, it was something you said earlier about characters like doing things that you would never do. Like that's part of what fiction is for. So like having a place where we can explore all those messy realities. And Emma, in regards to you like fiction that damages your heart. So I have chronic upper back pain, and part of that means I have like these knots in my shoulders that basically won't ever go away because it's basically like hardened cartilage. And the only way to undo it is to damage it. You have to damage it because it reconnects the nerve tissue to it and sends more blood there, and that'll eventually soften the tissue. So there is science to be said for sometimes if you damage your own heart, maybe it just comes back a little bit softer and stronger.
That makes sense, because like one, catharsis is good for you. Crying is good for you. It gets crying. The emotion out. I don't cry a lot in my real life, so maybe that's what I'm looking for in fiction, although I'm also typically not crying at what's sad so much as like a moment of kindness in the midst of what's really difficult. But yeah, no, I get a little frustrated with people who decry like the genderqueer. Like I kind of hate that word. I think it's really demeaning to people who are writing stuff that is like fluffier. And but at the same time, it's just not quite my bag. Like, and I know that it's not my lane. I'm over here writing the stuff that's like maybe gonna traumatize you a little.
I have to say that is my first time hearing the phrase genderqueer, and I do love the pun.
It is a good pun. I think it's usually used derogatory.
Of the word, because there are some people who use it just to be mean, and they're
I would never use it, but I heard it and I was pun.
No, I completely agree with you, Emma, that I love that it exists. I completely cheer on people who write it, people who read it, and find what they need out of fiction there. I will occasionally enjoy it as a reader. Tends not to be what I write, and that's fine.
All right. Well, we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to softball you a couple small questions. And if I don't see any Q&As down below, but if anybody has any pressing questions they haven't asked, please throw that in the chat or in that little Q&A button. First really important question is for Emma. What is the name of the cat behind you?
Pigeon.
I love them.
The other ones are named Dude, Mr. Moat, and Ted, for Laser Ted.
You have excellent cat names.
Those are great cat names.
Thank you.
Okay. The next question is for both of you. I had to know. So one of my favorite things is like, we all obviously love comp titles, but better than comp titles, every now and then we'll do pairings at the store, like they're wine pairings, that these two things go together. And I will say your two books go together very well. But if you had to pick something that you are reading or watching that you have loved, or that maybe you're currently in the middle of, that you think would pair well with your book, like a delicious chocolate or a fine wine, what kind of media would you like people to read or watch before or after they read your book to go with in your dream world?
I don't know if this is so much of a pairing as a like what we were just talking about with people who all different views and really understanding all different views, and that it would just I don't know. This book is breaking my brain. I just want to recommend it to people. So I'll just throw it out there. I'm currently in the middle of Sue Davies Okumo's Son of the Storm, Son of Storms. I might be getting the title slightly wrong. Can somebody help me out?
I don't remember.
I think it's Son of the Storm. And it is so good. Oh my gosh. I don't know who the antagonist is, right? Like, I mean, I sort of, you can sort of tell there are shades of etc. But everybody's so understandable, and it talks about themes of migration and language and amazing ways in which everybody that I've just never seen in fiction, and it's so true to what I see in immigrant communities, and being a first generation person and coming from an immigrant family, and these ideas that it just gets so flattened out of our narratives when we have these discourses on immigration politically and stuff, because it just gets very binary, and the way it feels so real in such amazing ways that it's touching all the pieces of me, like MSA, like all it gets right in there, and just how these characters relate to each other and their world, and how they are reacting to an increasingly high stakes and difficult problems in their world, and I'm just so riveted, and I feel a little bit self-aggrandizing comparing my book to it, so I feel like I shouldn't answer this question with it, but certainly
Pairing,
on
it's
similar
pairing.
theme. Sure, I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. I would say thematically, in terms of wanting to have like this idea of these characters all reacting in different ways and having vastly different philosophies, and sometimes violently different ideas on things, and being violently opposed to each other, and being just so understandable where everybody's coming from. It's amazing. I love it. I'm very blown away.
You've sold it very well.
Yes. The sequel's coming out in, I think, December, so
yeah,
I need
I
to get
remember
ready
seeing
for
the cover.
that.
Okay, time to hop on a trilogy so that it can torment me while I wait for the third. uh, so a thing I plug as often as possible, because it was part of what was on my brain when I started writing Archive, and I'm still like with it because it's an ongoing thing. It's one of those real play podcasts where they like play a tabletop RPG.
Love them.
And they're called Friends at the Table, and they alternate between like different settings and seasons. And they've got a high fantasy one where they like it they were just so clever, and they're so interested in collaborating toward dramatic irony, and they're just really good at like eking out these delightful things out of characters. And I was listening to one of their, I think their first mecha series called Counterweight, when I was in lung therapy while I was first started working on this book. And they're back in the mecha like universe again with a season called Palisade, and it deals so well with empire and also with notions of being and being in relation to people. And I'm the kind of nerd who's been reading speculative fiction so long that the question, like, is a robot a people, is really boring to me. And they are so far past that question that they're kind of like, what kind of people could you be? And it's so good. And if you thought I did any kind of clever word or naming thing in Archive, I am a baby. They're so good at it. So yeah, I try to plug them at every opportunity because they were definitely formative while I was writing this book.
As a Dimension 20 girly, I'm just going to save this for later the next time I need a binge. It sounds very up my alley. We have a quick question. We'll see if you can answer it quickly, from Jay in the chat. Jay asks, how do you manage how much world building to reveal to readers and how much to withhold and trust the readers to not get hung up on it?
My editor. I tend to be pretty withholding. So like my agent had coached me into like putting more exposition in, and like when he received it, he was like, we're cutting most of this because I can tell you like that this isn't quite the way you write, and I want to like take out as much exposition as we can get away with. So I don't have an instinct toward it because I am afraid of exposition, although I love really clever, well done stuff, and I'm trying to get better at it, but I need help.
For me, it's just vibes, to be honest. So this is it was a very quick answer to the question. I feel a little like that's a little bit of a cop-out answer, but it really is, I want there to be just enough so the reader isn't lost, and then also, and just trying to put myself in the shoes of somebody reading the book, but also I need to know enough that it's clear that there's a depth here that you're seeing pieces of as you're reading, and that's what I prefer as a reader, and I try to give that to other people. I have a private wiki for this book that has 100 pages ish in it. There's a lot of world.
I love that. Like I like kind of deliberately don't know things until they're concretely in the book. Like there's some things that I actually know in pretty good detail, but they're not in the books. They're not canon, so they can change if I need them to.
Yep. I love that. All right. Our last question. Is there anything else you want readers to know about your new books? As a reminder, that's the Water Outlaws and the Archive Undying, which I definitely didn't drop, which you can buy now at oblongbooks.com. What else do you want readers to know about these beautiful matching books?
I'm gonna say something because I think people have not been noticing, which both tickles me, but I also kind of want people to notice a little bit, which is I have 5 point of view characters in this book. One of them is written completely without pronouns, either in the character's own point of view or in any other people's point of view. This was very much a craft challenge, and I really enjoyed doing it. The reason to do this, by the way, was since there's sort of a translation convention, they're probably speaking something that's sort of some fantasy version of Old Chinese, which has ungendered pronouns. So nobody's misgendering anybody by pronoun at any time. All the trans characters are, correctly translated to their English pronouns, etc. But, what do you do with a character for whom that would all be incorrect, who is some sort of off the binary, where maybe a neo-pronoun might be best, I don't know, but it doesn't really fit in with the politics of the time. Even, among these bandits, they would maybe have conversations about that if that was part of their experience, but nobody's misgendering each other with pronouns, so that's not even on the radar, right?
That's such a feat.
Thank you. I was talking to my sister about this because I since the book's been out, I've been asking, like, anybody notice it? Nobody's noticing it. And my sister's like, it's because you did it really well. And I'm like, well, thank you, but also
pay attention. I need the compliment.
That's the kind of thing where if you do it really well, like I was working for a time with a manga publisher, and there's this one, I forget what it is named, but the joke is sort of like it's a series about high school girls, except all the high school girls are beautiful boys of different sorts. So there's like, and I think they called it like thigh high or something, because like it's fan servicey as well. But like the translators and the editors worked really hard to use no pronouns whatsoever throughout the entire book, and they did it.
That's easier in Japanese, but in like translating that to English, really hard. Right?
Yeah, they worked real hard. So like, if nobody noticed, you did a really good job.
Well, I'm interested to see if any discourse arises on it. I would love it if people talked about it a little bit, but I also kind of love it that people don't notice. So I'm very torn on this, right? So
yeah. I guess the thing I'd want to say about Archive, one, I think I'm pretty funny. I hope people think it's funny. But also like it's a lot about disability and illness. It's just like baked into the story and the ideas. So yeah, it's a lot of where I was coming from, and I didn't really realize until retrospect, oh, okay, that's what was going on there.
That's what I was sorting out. Got it.
Yeah.
And the idea of, talking about heavy themes and also being funny and fun, these are I feel like we need more of this, right? This is what I want to see in fiction, and what I'm trying to do with the Water Outlaws also, right? Like this idea that we can talk about these heavy themes just like in life, and also laugh sometimes, and have fun and have an escapist book while also having our hearts, beaten and hurt.
I mean, that's part of why I was thinking, like, man, I wish I'd had these characters when I was a teenager, because I would have giggled, but like I would have felt so good in my my being in the world, though.
I feel like you and I have such similar tastes in fiction. This is
Yes.
awesome.
Now I have to go read. Like, the Sun and the Storm has been kind of on my to read list, but like, oh, okay, now I have to read it.
Yeah.
Like, have to.
Yeah, I honestly can't believe that I haven't seen more like zeitgeist of the like Gideon the Ninth variety in my circles, because I feel like it's just that, it's hitting all those parts.
Oh man.
Noted.
Oh.
All right. Yeah. Well, we are technically 5 minutes over time, so I am going to wrap it up by reminding you that you can get the Archive Undying and the Water Outlaws if you're far away from me at your local independent bookstore, but also here at Oblong Books. Go to oblongbooks.com. You can pick up the book in store, or we ship it. We're great at shipping them. We actually have signed copies of Water Outlaws, so like get on that.
Here's some of the people who got the book plates. Yay!
Yeah. Emma and Lisa, thank you both so much for this absolutely wonderful conversation. And thank you to our wonderful audience for listening in. As always, you can head to oblongbooks.com to learn more about our events. Emma, Lisa, where can people find you on the internet to learn more about your books?
Oh gosh, slhuang.com website, which I still haven't updated because I've been so busy with release stuff. It's been out a week. And SL_Huang on Twitter, which is slowly dying, so less and less. SL_Huang no underscore at wandering.shop on Mastodon, but who knows where socials are going, so I don't know.
So go to the website.
Yeah.
The links will be there.
You can find me at EM Candon, Candon, so just M Candon, basically everywhere but Twitter. I am technically still on Twitter, at Emma Candon, but like the Star Wars anthology that I'm in came out, and I just decided I'm not going to talk about it on there because I don't enjoy it.
For the record, we have that Star Wars anthology in stock at Oblong Books. You can buy both at the same time.
If you care about Star Wars blorbos, I got to write for Wedge Antilles, who is like one of baby's first blorbos. I love him so much.
I was so into the Rogue Squadron series when I was a teenager. So into it. So good.
Yeah, no, that and the Wraith Squadron, like, God, I was just
both of those.
I feel very fortunate. So like that came out today. Yay. But yeah, like I said, I'm on Tumblr. I like it there. It's very goofy. I've been enjoying Blue Sky. I've been trying to be on Instagram more. So you'll find me.
And you can find Oblong Books at Instagram at Oblong Books and at oblongbooks.com, as I've mentioned about 500 times. Again, Emma and Lisa, thank you both so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And if you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, hi, thanks for watching too. You all have a wonderful night and happy reading.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.